Hi everyone, welcome back. In today's video we're talking about Robert Jordan's The Eye of the World, published in 1990. The Wheel of Time is a mammoth series, clocking in at 14 books, plus a prequel, and totalling over 4 million words. It's quite the commitment, and it took me nearly 10 years to finally finish this series. I think I bought the first books when I was about 14, got to about 5 or 6, stopped, and then last year decided to go back to it, bought the rest of the books, and finally finished it. Now while I'm waiting for the TV show to come out, I thought it'd be good to go back, reread the books, and then since I've started this YouTube channel, come on here and blather about them to you guys. A modern Lord of the Rings. Starting with something that some people view as a positive for this book, whereas others view it as a negative, let's talk about the connection between The Eye of the World and The Lord of the Rings. So Robert Jordan himself said that The Eye of the World was somewhat of a love letter to Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. This means that there are certain elements of the novel that are derivative from that series. Some people use this to criticise the novel by saying that it's derivative of Tolkien and not really offering anything new or original. On the whole though, I think this novel is better described as a reinvention of some Tolkien ideas for a modern audience. Jordan does go into some new directions that Tolkien didn't even touch in his Lord of the Rings series. For example, Jordan's influences are much broader than Tolkien's. Whereas Tolkien mostly drew from Western and in particular Celtic mythologies for his stories, Jordan goes much broader than this, looking at Eastern philosophy and religion as well as those from the Western canon. You've got the idea that time is this eternal cycle, going over and over again, with things repeating themselves. That's coming from Buddhist or Hindu ideas of reincarnation and the cyclical nature of time. You've also got in the magic system this idea of balance between man and woman, but also the elements of nature. Again, these are all more Eastern ideas than Western ones. Even where Jordan does borrow more heavily from Tolkien, he usually adds his own spin to whatever it is that he's using. A good example of this is the character of Moiraine. Moiraine is essentially a Gandalf-type character, although she differs from Gandalf in quite a few ways. Her relationship to the characters that she travels with is very different from that of Gandalf. With Gandalf, everyone that surrounds him immediately loves him and trusts him, and basically Gandalf is the leader of the troop. Moiraine, on the other hand, is someone who is constantly met with suspicion and distrust by those that follow her. Not only is this different from Tolkien's Gandalf, but also it makes more sense if you think about this in terms of how people would react to some strange, wise wizard coming into their town and then telling them that they have to go and travel with them across the world, and they're not really revealing all that much information as to why they have to come with them either. Also, for those of you who may have read The Lord of the Rings and struggle with that older writing style, this is definitely a book that you might like, because as I say, it's certainly a modern reimagining of that kind of classic fantasy adventure story. The devil is in the detail. One of the things that is most distinctive about Jordan's writing style is the level of detail that he goes into. This is something that again can be both a positive and a negative. While in later novels it can get annoying to listen to for the 1000th time about how some Aes Sedai is adjusting her shawl or smoothing her skirts or sniffing at people. In the early novels, this detail actually helps build a really strong image of the world that Jordan has created. Jordan doesn't just do this for the sake of it either. Oftentimes he uses these detailed descriptions of what characters are wearing to tell us something symbolically about the characters themselves. For example, Moiraine is always dressed in this smooth, clear blue dress. On the one hand, this just symbolises her Aja, which is the sect of the Aes Sedai that she belongs to, but it also reflects her personality. Moiraine is a cool and calm and collected character, and this is reflected in the way that she dresses in these smooth blue clothes. Another good example of this is Tom Merrilin, who dresses in this multicoloured gleeman's cloak. Like Moiraine, his attire symbolises firstly his profession, but it also symbolises his personality. Tom is a character with many sides to him, and that's again reflected in the clothes that he wears. As I say, this can get a bit grating in the later novels, where you've heard some of these descriptions just too many times to care anymore. However, in the first few novels, it's a great way for Jordan to build his world and create unique descriptions of locations and characters so that they all feel unique and distinctive. A Troubled Fellowship. The Eye of the World primarily focuses on the character of Rand, one of the young farm boys who travels with Moiraine across the world. Through Rand, Jordan explores the psychological and physical harm that such an adventure would have on a person who's barely 17 years old. We see Rand go from a character who would have killed to have gone on a big adventure, to someone who is plagued by doubts and fears and misses his home. What's also good about the way that Jordan does this is that he doesn't always focus just on the negative. It's not a story about someone who is initially naive and bright, who then, falls down into someone who just wishes that he was home again. There are moments where Rand loves his adventure, when he sees big cities for the first time, or when he's in taverns dancing with his friends. But then there are other times when he's in danger or when he's alone and is scared and in pain from travelling, where he wishes he was back home. It's a really detailed telling of that kind of story. Also, because the novel is told mostly through Rand's perspective from start to finish, it means that you really have a lot of time to develop a relationship with the character. There is, however, one part of the story where we do get a bit of insight into some of the other characters. I enjoy this little interlude, as it gives a bit of a broader perspective of what's happening with the other characters, and again allows Jordan to consider how the journey would be affecting different people in different ways. On the one hand, you have Perrin, who is the character who seems to long for home the most. Whereas Perrin is very introverted in his desire to go home, you have Nynaeve, who is incredibly extroverted about her desire to go home, and she takes all of this out on Moiraine, blaming her for taking the children away and for basically ruining their whole life. There's some really good character work in these few chapters. Perrin and Egwene have some time to develop a relationship, but up until that point, and even after that point, doesn't really get mentioned again. I think that's a shame because I really like the relationship that those two characters have. Also, Nynaeve gets to spend a bit of time with Moiraine and her warder Lan, and again, you have the build-up of some very interesting relationship dynamics between these three. Overall, Jordan creates some really complex characters, and also manages to bring out different relationship dynamics between all of them. The fellowship that they're a part of is definitely a dysfunctional one. Characters fall out, characters distrust each other, and there are only a few moments in the novel where everyone seems to get along with everyone. Again, I think this is a much more realistic image of what travelling with other people on a quest would be like. It's not all roses and songs and wenches and all that. It's hardship, it's bickering, it's distrust, and it's danger. Also, he keeps the focus, at least for this novel, on one character, which makes for a much better introduction to the world that he's created, because you don't have to worry about trying to get into the psychologies of like 1,000 different characters. It's a great novel, but... Okay, so on to some negative things before we wrap up. I don't really have much to say negatively about this novel. I think it's great. I think it's one of the best fantasy novels ever written, and it's definitely one of the best entries of this series, although it's certainly not the best of them. Despite the defense I gave earlier to the criticism that it's derivative, I do think that it does deserve a little bit of criticism on those grounds. The novel does have a very predictable format. It's very much an adventure story where they're going from tavern to tavern, and there's a big bad at the end, and you kind of get the idea. While that's not necessarily a bad thing, and like I said earlier in the video, Jordan does do some interesting things with this. He's not just copying older ideas, he's developing them. It does make for a more predictable novel overall. I do feel like the last fifth of this novel was somewhat like a rush to the finish line. With the first 2/3, Jordan spends a long time really building his world, developing relationships, but then as it gets to the end, everything just kind of happens like that. It was as if Jordan had spent, the first 2/3 really building his world, and then he realised, oh crap, I've, written 500, 600 pages and I need to finish this thing, so then he just finished it. That being said, this is a series that does suffer from pacing issues. I mean, you're going to have pacing problems when you've written 14 books of, mammoth size. But that being said, the world building and build up in those first 2/3 is really good. So if that's the price you have to pay for a complete whole novel, then it might be worth it after all anyway. Also, in comparison to some of the pacing problems that we get later in the series, it's really not that bad a criticism at all. So yeah, these are minor criticisms overall. I do think this is one of the better novels in the series, and one of the best fantasy novels, especially in that traditional classic fantasy vein. Okie dokie, that's it for this video. If you like what I do here, please like and subscribe for more content, and let me know in the comments below what your thoughts are on The Eye of the World. I'm currently on my way through The Great Hunt on audiobook, so hopefully I will have that finished, hopefully within a week or two, and then I can get on with the next video in the series. I'll see you all in the next video.